So first I want to review where we left off in segment 5, the last part we were doing last week. There I showed you a kind of a commercial for a video game mod that you could install that made the game more real. It's a first-person game called Skyrim, and you use a controller and you push buttons and you move around just like you're walking through a world. And I played that game for a long time. It really is huge. You go wherever you want.
Oh, good.
You know, the world goes on and on and on and on and on and on. There's finally borders, but they're so far out, you rarely ever run into one. And you go through mountains and deserts and everything. There's all the animals and the insects and they even have like the pollen in the air. It's very real. Yeah, the pollen's moving around the air. Oh, really quite a game. Very beautiful too. It takes place in the Middle Ages, but like a fantasy Middle Ages with dragons.
Okay.
Well, the reason that I showed that is it's an example where you see that through computer algorithms correlating mathematical states with certain colors and sounds, that entire experience is really just a set of numbers, or ones and zeros on one level.
Okay. Yeah.
But experientially, when you play the game, you're experiencing it very much like our world. So I'm showing how you can experience a world that's in a numeric state in a sensible state. So one of the things I wanted to do before I go on, because I want to say a little more about that, is I want to just make sure that a word that I use a lot is understood, okay? And that's the word sensible qualities, okay? I got that when I was studying philosophy, and it's a little bit archaic, okay, the wording, although it's still correct language, they would say it differently today. But I like the term. Do you know what it means, sensible qualities, when I say I'm experiencing sensible qualities? Like, what are sensible qualities and why are they called sensible? Do you know? I'm going to tell you. I'm just seeing if...
Go ahead, because as it relates to philosophy...
Okay, that's fine. My professor had to tell me when I was working on my thesis advisor. I was asking him, well, what is... Berkeley used the word, but they used the word in the 1700s, sensible qualities.
Wow.
But I said, I think he saw that I was confused about what it meant, and he said, it doesn't mean sensible. First of all, they don't mean sensible like reasonable, okay? Reasonable qualities. They mean like your senses. The qualities of the world, meaning the properties or characteristics that we experience by our sense organs.
Okay.
So there's mainly 5 colors,
Yeah.
okay, of which there are many colors, the spectrum of colors through our eyes. The spectrum of sounds through our ears. There's a couple of spectrums there because there's pitch and there's volume and different things. And then there's the spectrum of fragrances that we experience through our nose.
Gotcha.
And through our tongue, we have a spectrum of flavors, sour stuff. And then through our hands, tactily, we experience a spectrum of sensations through our hands. So we experience textures, we experience hot and cold through our hands. Yeah. And so these are all what are called sensible qualities. They're what our experience of the world as we walk about is made of. It's like, for instance, the other kind of qualities that are besides sensible qualities are quantitative. Okay, so that they're not qualities at all. They're quantities. So, for instance, there's a certain I could describe the inner area of this room in geometry terms and in terms of the width of the room, and the length of the room, and the height, and I could state what kind of rectangle it is, and I can tell the volume of the room, okay?
Yes.
But I don't walk around experiencing those things directly like that, I don't like, oh, look at the volume of the room. It's the number, 1,800, kilos or gallons or,
It's a rectangle.
Yeah, it's a rectangle, it's a square. These are more things that we abstract from our experience. So we'll have our sensible experience of the color, the sound, the taste, the feel, of say this table. But then I can abstract from it those things like it's a square, it's that long, it's that wide, it's that heavy, okay?
Yeah.
I can assign a number even to these temperatures that feel a certain way, that I can put a thermometer there and I can go, that's 60 degrees, okay? They're numbers, but I don't perceive those numbers in the same way. I don't perceive them through my senses. I have to use reason, and I abstract them from my experience. I'm sorry that I don't have an easier word than that, but
okay.
you have to sort of tease them out of the world with some thinking, some rulers and things. Okay, that's what sensible qualities is. I just wanted to clear that up because, sometimes, I found this a long time ago, I'll be explaining something and somebody will be nodding all the way through. And then I'll say the one word that was the critical word I was using the whole time. And I'll say, well, do you know what that word means? And they shake their head, no, I don't know what that word means. Which means they didn't know what I was talking about. Okay?
I hear you.
So that's always a little painful because I get it. I get it because you don't even notice that you don't know what that word means sometimes. You're going, well, it sounds like it. You kind of feel like, well, it'll get clear at some point, but it really won't if I don't stop sometimes. That was a bit of a delay to say that, but it was right here I wanted to say that. Okay?
Okay.
So, because this is what I've been talking about, I've been wanting to explain the way we get our experience of sensible qualities in this system. Now, you're just going to have to listen to me because I'm going to be holding up a visual aid for the camera.
Okay.
And I'm not going to, we've already done this a couple of times. And if you don't need to follow it, just listen to what I say. I have a system that's all nicely drawn here. No matter how nicely I draw it, when I get to this point where mathematical qualities get perceived as sensible qualities, like color and sound, those things were senses, I find it very hard to make a nice drawing of that. And I'm showing here that, and I'll zoom in when I edit this, I kind of get a little jumble. It gets jumbled in my drawings because I have a lot of things going on in my head that I haven't thought of how to express two-dimensionally on a piece of paper. I think before my book gets published, I've got to think of some ways to express this visually. But I have to now sort of take this apart, break this, and explain. That's what we're doing with the scene from Skyrim. That was part of that.
Okay.
Trying to show how these mathematical states, they correspond to sensible qualities, like sound and picture in the case of a computer game. But I have another example I want to give here that expresses this this change that happens in this process, in this evolution. The evolution is going along in all these, you've got space and time and natural laws, and then you could explain just about everything in the inorganic world in terms of the laws of nature, because you could describe the evolution of, say, a planet with rocks and water and various gases and metals, just in terms of, first there's the nebula, and then it's spinning, and then it's, then it cools and it hardens, and then the gases become liquefied, and then that rains down onto the world, it fills the oceans, but then the oceans then keep trying to level out, so rivers are formed that carve out the rocks. All that could be described in terms of laws as simple as gravity and all the other laws of nature. Okay?
Okay.
And so you could do that mathematically. You could model that without being able to perceive it. It would be like a mathematical model because all the laws of nature are mathematical laws. So I say the world originally is in that state, and it's experienced from a single perspective or a single point of view, because there's no individual points of view. It's just sort of like, if you want, in the mind of God. Ideas in the mind of God. I don't like using those words because they're kind of problems. And like, then what is God? So I don't think like that. I say, there's just perception and ways of seeing and ways of seeing. These laws are ways of seeing, that's all they are, so they really never have anything but perception going on. Perceiving, ways of perceiving. And we get an inorganic world. But at a certain point, what evolves in this world is our organic forms that have nervous systems. Now, on one level, I've already said this a couple of times, I think that those are, on one level, they are in a mathematical state. But part of what is evolving is another set of lenses, like, okay, which by an algorithm take the sense, the data that is taken by the nervous system, and it correlates it. So, I wrote this down. Let's say that the neural states of your brain, which has evolved, contains electrical states. And electricity is really, at least in my opinion, is nothing more than frequencies. And a frequency is a ratio of a certain number of vibratory cycles over a certain amount of time. So it's sort of like 60 megahertz means 60 cycles per second. That's all it means. Okay. And through our senses, we are able to algorithmically assign a sensible state to each one of those vibratory states. So instead of experiencing electricity, we experience the sensible qualities. That's the reason I said way back, I showed a picture and it showed the brain with all this electrical firing like a Tesla photograph. Okay. But I said that electricity doesn't really like that. You can't see it. So, because it's really just mathematical states. But through a set of perceptual schemas that evolve in the organic form, as it's developing a neural system, it's able to experience these numeric neural states as sensible qualities. Okay.
That was a mouthful.
That was a mouthful, and maybe I did more harm than good, but I'm going to demonstrate what I mean in a funny way right now. So I say a certain frequency is experienced as a certain shade of red, for instance. We have perceptual schemas that make these conversions by algorithms. Okay. So again, I perceive I experience my body and its electrical states. I experience through a series of lenses, which are algorithms by which I'm able to convert that into sensible experience. And it's also the reason that from that sensible experience, I can actually abstract out the math again, the mathematical states. That's when people become very scientific, they're actually teasing out what's actually more fundamentally there, the mathematical state, that they don't see with their senses, they have to use their mind. Okay, so now I'm going to show another video that demonstrates the sense of seeing numeric states as sensible qualities. And here's why I'd like you to put on these headphones, or wait 1 second and put them on. There's a scene in the movie The Matrix, which yesterday you told me you remember seeing, but you don't remember it well. And there's a character named Cypher, and he's sort of deciphering the Matrix. He sits at a computer monitor all day in the ship.
Okay.
And he's the guy who betrays them, and
Yes.
it's okay. But this is before he betrays them, and it's the reason that Neo comes up behind him while he's staring at his monitor screen, looking at the Matrix.
Yeah.
And the guy jumps. Cypher jumps. Ooh, you scared me! I just wanted you to know, so you'll know what's going on when you hear this.
Good.
It scares him because, of course, he's plotting to sabotage
He's not
the
thinking
law.
good thoughts.
No, he's not thinking.
Plotting.
Yeah, he's having bad thoughts. Okay, so so he's watching the code, and it's scrolling down the screen, those green numbers, and he says he doesn't see the code. He tells Neo. He says, but instead he sees. Well, he doesn't call it sensible qualities, but he puts it in a very funny way. He says, I just see redheads, brunettes, blondes. Because see, he's seeing the world, the Matrix, as you experience it, processed, basically. Like, there's an earlier scene where Neo is walking with Orpheus, is that his name? Something like that. And Orpheus freezes the thing, and there's this beautiful red-headed woman. She's early in the thing, but she's not real, Orpheus says. She's really part of the Matrix. She's just a bunch of numbers. But so Cypher is staring at the screen of numbers, but he's seeing the numbers as what they represent.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to go to that scene.
Whoa! Neo, you scared the bejesus out of me.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Is that?
The Matrix? Yeah.
Do you always look at it and code it?
Well, you have to. The image translators work for the construct program. But there's way too much information to decode the Matrix. You get used to it. I don't even see the code. All I see is blonde, brunette, redhead. Hey, you, want a drink?
Sure.
So he says exactly what I mean to say. I see this as something else. I see these mathematical states as sensible states.
Okay.
His mind does it though, obviously, okay? So this is, how does his mind do that conversion? Well, he has evolved these schemas for doing that, okay? These only represent ways of seeing, they're not real things when I have these filters. I don't mean there's some kind of magical filter somewhere. They're just, it's just a metaphor for a way of seeing. Now, it's interesting because the Hindus, and I didn't understand this even when I did my earlier set of talks, the Hindus have a concept of Maya, and Maya comes from a root word which means trick or magic, like a magic trick. And the way we see the illusory reality is through the power of Maya. Well, because they called it magic, I said, well, it's just magical thinking, but I've actually had a kind of conversion. See, the example that's given in Vedanta for what Maya does is the example of, I told you already, you come upon a stick and you think it's a snake.
Okay.
Now that's interesting. That you go, well, how did the stick get there? I heard somebody asking that after a talk at the Mayor Center. That process of seeing something as something else creates even the stick in my system. I start from the very beginning where there's absolutely nothing, there's no content. You're not seeing something as something. The very seeing as and then seeing as and then seeing as actually builds up the full content. Part of the reason, if you go back through my system, look up my charts, you'll see that that's true. Now, I want to say something, and that is that earlier I kind of made fun of, so that's a pitch for the Hindus.
Okay.
I had sort of mocked the Matrix, and I said, well, see, it's really basically a representation of our two-world view, and that's why it's so weird, and it's really not as mystical as people think. It's basically our materialist view of a real world. But that's not the part that I am using as an example here. My system doesn't have, in the Matrix, they have two worlds. Mine does not have two worlds. It's just that the world that is there is perceived as, you know, sensible states.
Okay.
But so that's the comparison to the Matrix ends there. It ends with this is a real nice example, actually, the scene of sort of like how we experience the world. In a metaphor, Cypher this is how he experiences his brain states, unknowingly to himself. Okay, he's experiencing mathematical states as sensible states. So that's all I wanted to show. Now, this idea is that the world at a more fundamental level is mathematical, or it's made of number. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. That idea has gotten a lot of traction lately. People know about it from these movies and computer games. I mean, virtual reality basically just is that. That's what it is. I mean, they just put on headsets connected to a computer that are rattling off mathematical states as sensible states. That's your virtual reality system. And if they could make smells and flavors and, you know, hot and cold and a few things that like really flip us out, we would have the hologram, okay? The holodeck.
Yeah.
Okay, but this idea of another more basic level of reality being number, literally being number, isn't new. It's very ancient. And in fact, it goes back before Plato. And Plato was influenced by it. The Pythagoreans, that's exactly what they believed. They are the disciples of Pythagoras, for whom the Pythagorean theorem is named. And they lived in southern Italy before the time of Plato and Socrates. But, Pythagoras believed that the things we see and hear and smell fundamentally are mathematical, beautiful ratios. And there was a first century historian named Alexander Polyhistor. The first century, that means right 2,000 years ago, he wrote an interpretation of Pythagoras' thinking. But the reason I read this is we have no writing from Pythagoras. Okay,
Oh,
so he describes how Pythagoras seems to have thought from what fragments they had. And so this is a recreation. I'm going to read it. It's a little short paragraph.
Okay.
I'm going to put it on the screen too while I'm reading. The principle of all things is the monad or unit. Okay? And I think that you could call that in a more understandable language, unity or oneness, okay? From the monad and the undefined dyad, which means duality or two-ness,
Okay.
spring number. Now, Chris Hill, my professor, said that is fundamental, set theory, which is reducible to two, does give you all mathematics. This is sort of like the principle of two-ness and oneness do give you all mathematics. It's like reducible to 1 and 2.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not a a theoretical mathematician. But
Okay.
apparently they're able to understand and that. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. It's not my area. I'm not a mathematician. But that's what I've been led to understand. Okay, so let me start over. The principle of all things is the monad or unit. From the monad and the undefined dyad spring numbers. From numbers, points. From points, lines. From lines, plane figures. From plane figures, solid figures. From solid figures, sensible bodies. So sensible objects, like that we see.
Yeah.
The elements of which are 4, fire, water, earth, and air. They're thinking like Greeks. But that's it. The point is, he doesn't use my system of ways of perceiving, like lenses. I don't think they could have thought that way at that time. First of all, they didn't have psychology. And they didn't have lenses. They couldn't, they didn't have clear glass.
Okay.
Okay, they didn't have things like that. I don't think the metaphor would have even been discoverable 2,500 years ago. It's just that, but he does have that somehow there's like a process or evolution. And they're all those states are here at the same time. It's not like there used to be numbers, okay? The idea that the world is most fundamentally mathematical or constructed out of basic geometric principles, like the sphere, the cube, was a major influence on Plato. Engraved at the door of Plato's Academy is this college he created in the end of his life, were the words, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter."
Oh.
A homage to Pythagoras and this belief, okay?
Okay.
So what I'm describing as a fundamental mathematical layer of reality isn't at all novel, okay? It just seems sort of novel today,
But it goes back way back.
Yeah, it goes back. And also, to the very origins of Western thought. Pythagoras is just sort of like, a founder of Western thought. I mean, nobody influenced Plato, for instance, as much as Pythagoras.
Okay.
Now, I want to say one little thing, and that is something I'm not saying for anybody who could easily think that I am for a moment because they weren't listening carefully enough, and that is that I'm not saying that the world really is fundamentally mathematical.
Yes.
Because even that mathematical state, I show how it's created by the lenses. It just appears, they're just relations that you get by looking at, you're looking at mathematical states through schemas that create more mathematical states. But there's no actual mathematical states there. Even they are just apparent from the point of view of the single subject. And so I just want to say that in a way, one of the implications of everything I'm saying is that all of this is just appearance. And you could say it's all an illusion. You could say that. Except that it's a very fixed, robust, shared illusion that can kill you. So be cautious with this illusion. But I'm not saying the world is fundamentally mathematical. I'm saying there is a layer at which it is mathematical. Like that's more fundamental. But absolutely fundamental, if you went right back to the to the most fundamental, it would be perception itself. Okay. There's only seeing and ways of seeing. So fundamentally, there's only this perception going on.
Okay.
Not the math. Now, okay, I have to just keep going and have faith because I'm worried I'm making this difficult the way I'm describing it, and I somehow should go slower, but I can't. I just got to go through this house and get through it. Okay. All right. Last week, I promised to discuss next two things. Or for a while, I think I've been saying I would get to this. That we're going to propose a different kind of evolution than Charles Darwin did. An evolution nonetheless. There's an evolution. I don't know, was that your phone?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm also, okay. I'm also, okay, now I'm going to do that. Okay. And at the same time that these schemas, I'm showing the camera, these schemas are evolving, okay?
Yes.
These lenses are being added to each other. I'm going to wait till your phone stops. Okay. At the same time that these schemas are building up the world in its mathematical state, there is okay, so at the same time that these perceptual schemas arise in the imagination of the one subject, producing the perceived universe in its number form, there are two other dynamics going on at the same time. That's why and it's because there's more than one little thing going on that makes these drawings impossible for me to do. I have to think about that.
Okay.
Because when I get in there, I got them all running together in my head, but I have to tell them one at a time for anybody else. So these are, first there's a kind of reincarnation that is occurring here once we get our nervous systems and the schemas by which we can interpret mathematical states as sensible states. Once that individual begins to arise, you have a kind of reincarnation. The reason, but it's not the kind of reincarnation that we've heard of from the New Age movement, okay?
Okay.
Which is a relic of Spiritism, which I've explained to you before and not in this series. Spiritism was sort of this idea that these spirits or these ghosts, and you channel them and they go in, sort of disembodied spirits. I'm not talking about anything like that. There's no room for any disembodied spirits here or something like that. What I'm talking about is an identification with a set of schemas. So as you begin to evolve in the organic world, like insects and things, you retain the legacy of your individual lenses that you gather during the span of your life. So when that insect dies, it takes another birth and retains the legacy of its experience, okay?
Good.
This is necessary for there to be any progress that goes beyond this, and you'll see what I'm saying as I go on. Now, but this reincarnation is just this reality I'm pointing to the one eye over on the left. It's kind of like looking through a prism where it breaks the light into all these different parts. It's identifying with the experience from this point of view. It's identifying itself as this at the same time that it is identifying itself as all of these. So death is the disassociation or disidentifying of these lenses that are retained, and birth is the taking them up again in another form. Now, where all this comes from, and no place else, and I couldn't have thought of this myself, I'm going to have to say, comes from the teaching of Meher Baba. All right. he calls these at this point sanskaras, but these earlier ones are also sanskaras, but you have to read very carefully to see that this is true. He says that basically the fundamental principle of this whole idea is the sanskara. And sanskara means a condition left on experience that causes you to experience things a different way. It's what makes you experience what you do. It's basically exactly what I've been describing. It's these lenses, okay?
Okay.
Now there's another dynamic going on, and I'm sorry that this is hard, but for some reason it doesn't feel hard in myself, but it's very hard when you have to break it into these parts and then explain them one at a time, and using kind of bad charts. It really is, it's very intuitive, it's really not that hard. And but I have to do it in this difficult way. The second one, is a dynamic. There's a biological evolution that's going on. All right, so as well as a kind of reincarnation. So now this biological evolution that goes on from here of different types of bodies and nervous systems through which you see getting more advanced and more advanced and more advanced over time, that evolution you sort of have to lay over this like an overlay. And here, and this evolution is a different evolution. It's a reincarnational evolution. There is a legacy, an individual that is developing across each of these forms. It's not just lost. They're not. God, it'd be sort of easier to read Mary Papa's own writing, and then you'd get it. But I'll show what I mean. I'm showing the lenses and the second part in the individual sets of lenses building the apparent world. This happens over time. These are rocks. That's the inorganic world corresponding with these earlier. That would be rocks, gases, and liquids, and atomic states, and radiation, and all that in its mathematical form. But once you have organic evolution, I show a plant, I show an insect, a fish, bird, a gorilla. The same identification or the sense of being an individual begins to arise, and it's caused by this sort of narrowing by the impressions that are kept as a legacy of each individual. So let's call this a soul, even though I don't like that word because it makes it seem like it's something separate from the original. Okay, because but let's call it a soul. Mary Baba does. This individual, an individual soul. It experiences itself as all these plants, then as all these bugs, then as these fish, then as all the types of bird, and then a mammal. And with each one of these, because of its evolving nervous system, it's experiencing more and more of the world. Now this is really important. This is where it gets different than Darwinism. I'm going to try to explain this. Okay. I have to explain that in Darwinism, there can be no pattern over time. Like, for instance, no consistent ongoing pattern. In other words, in Darwin, the thing that is making evolution occur is just accidents. It's just chance. You have chance mutations that are just selected for that chance mutation on a genetic level that produces something that has more offspring before it dies. The thing that has more offspring before it dies will reproduce itself more than those who have less offspring before they die. That's the real meaning of fittest.
Okay.
It doesn't matter how fit you are, it's how much you reproduce. So there's nothing in there that would select for any particular feature in you. Like, for instance, if you suddenly start developing prettier wings, it just doesn't care. There's no, you get it, it's just like blind. Darwinian evolution is entirely, but they're proud of that. I mean, you know, it's just a blind process. It's just chance. It's just like the chance of throwing, you know, dice, you know.
Okay.
Nothing affects it. So there can be no bias toward any pattern over time, because that would imply design or some kind of theme to evolution, which is antithetical to Darwin's theory. Did you follow that?
Yes.
Okay, but there is a pattern in evolution, and materialists have to constantly, either they're too stupid to notice it, which is very possible, or if they do, they have to distract us from saying anything because they don't know what to say, because it's antithetical to their theory. Darwinism can't be right and you have a pattern. So
yes.
Okay, so I mean, I heard a very intelligent scientific person recently say upsetly about Baba Lover's understanding of evolution. He was thinking of Darwinian evolution. He was saying there is no going somewhere. You see, the idea of Darwinian evolution is evolution's going on right now at all the levels. Okay, I'm going to talk about that and show that that's actually not true, but that's the theory. The evolution right now, there's new insects evolving, and it's just chaos.
Okay.
Any apparent order is just sort of order out of chaos by chance. But however, I'm going to show one pattern. I'm going to show more later. But this is the one we need to deal with at the moment. I'm going to show why it is. The pattern is, well, I show some patterns here. First, I show some where there's no pattern. I have dots, and they're on my screen. I turn the screen toward the camera, and those dots are completely random where they are. And then I'll click down, and we have where you have little dots far apart, and then as you move down, they get closer together and thicker. That would never happen in evolution because there isn't anything that would preserve over time some trend. Okay.
Right.
Right. So I go back here and I show other patterns. If you can't recognize, one of them is triangles all tipped to the right, pointing in a particular direction. Okay.
Okay.
If you couldn't see that, you'd be insane. There would be something wrong with you if you couldn't see that there's a pattern there. They're triangles. They're all triangles. They're all tipped a little to the right. They're not tipped down, up, left. Okay.
Yeah.
I could go over these. I don't need to. You get the idea. If you can't see the pattern, you're actually literally like
Blind.
Yeah, you're blind. You're effectively blind. Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell, even if you had eyesight, you wouldn't be able to tell that there was a person in this chair because you wouldn't see any pattern to it. Right. Thank you. I'm a blind man, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Okay. So the pattern, which I'm now showing, is that over the course of evolution, there's more ability to perceive. Nobody can deny that. Nobody can say that that evolution moved the opposite direction. That there wasn't a time where we found gorillas giving birth to fish and fish giving birth to, blind insects. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen that way. Okay?
Okay.
It always happened more. So I'll just name these creatures I have put here. Have you ever seen Mythbusters?
No.
Okay, well, it's a TV show, and they take a myth and they find out if it's true. Some meme, something people think. and modern myth. And some of them are not myths, some of them turn out to be true. And one of them was they took plants and they proved that they react electrically to what's going on and seem to be freaking out under certain, like they had a plant and they hooked it up to this electrical things, and then they took other plants and they were like burning them and smashing them, like in the plants that were like waiting for their turn to get all burned and smashed, they were like all freaking out. So there seems to be some kind of taking of experience by plants, okay?
Yes.
But a very small amount. But it's not nil, okay?
No.
Another example is that if you take a plant, you put it in the ground, and if rain comes, and the rain's always on this side of the plant, and the roots feel that, they'll all start growing in that direction. That means that they not only know where the water is, but they are using induction and assuming that there's a pattern, and that where there's been water before, there's going to be water in the future. That's why their roots start growing in that direction.
Okay.
The same with the sun, reaching toward the sun up above. You know, they'll begin to bend toward the sun. So there's evidence that there's some experiencing going on. Not a lot, but not nil. And then the next picture I have is like a wasp, and or hornet, and you know, there's a lot of research on how insects perceive. And then there's a fish, and this line of evolution, by the way, comes from Mayor Baba's. It's not from any textbook. I take it from Baba. Yes. And the next is a hawk. A hawk is really great because we say he can see like a hawk. Now hawks probably also hear very well, like little mice down there. So their perceptual acumen is known to be very, very high, very astute. And then I have a gorilla. Okay, I hardly need to say that a gorilla experience, even though his eyes might not be as sharp, his full spectrum of what's going on in the environment is much greater, because he's not only able to see, hear, feel, and all this stuff and smell very well, but he's also analyzing it more.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Intellectual.
Yeah, he's starting the intellectual capacity, right, and making decisions for his lady friends. Okay. Okay, so we have a pattern. That shouldn't be there under Darwinism. So a Darwinist has to just ignore that, okay? Now, okay, so I've laid out a process, you know, in my charts. It's like a line, a progression, and it's not like anything's ever added over time. It's just that things are seen as something else, and this builds a world. Okay, and this world, the process that creates that world, which is our experiential world, is the addition, nothing but the addition of these perceptual schemas. As I've said over and over and over, there's nothing else going on. There's just seeing and ways of seeing. It's the simplest way I can put it. Or perceiving and ways of organizing that experience, which gets richer and richer until it becomes the world we find ourselves in. And humans add more layers than just sensible qualities. Like, for instance, I'll see you as rich and me as poor.
Which is a concept.
Which is a concept, right. We'll start, it's also cultural. Yeah, so we'll start having cultural schemas. You know, you're more educated than me. Yeah, all these things. You married better, you know. Yeah, I don't know. His house is bigger, therefore he's better. Just even the idea of better, right, is funny. But we add a lot. But you know, that's what our entire. I mean, that's the human world. The human world's not really thinking about, oh, these are black. They're thinking, oh, how much were these? Where'd you buy these? Yeah. What does that say about Kerry? That he bought these at New York, you know? All right. I got these at Walmart, but they're good. They're good. You tried them.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so now, that's a process. That's a process. It's just a process of ways of seeing produce the world. However, an astute person should have noticed a problem, okay? So all that happened, what a wonderful coincidence. This lens, and then this lens, and then this lens, and who would have known, you know, because there's no creator here, there's no design, there's no designer. What in the world caused that process to happen?
Okay.
That question is how we got the God in the past, and the problems, all the problems. We got a designer. But we'll talk much later why that's impossible.
Okay.
It's impossible for there to be a designer because in this system we showed that something like a designer is something that comes out way at the end of the damn thing when you even have these concepts. So how could you have a designer of the very material out of which you get a designer? Mm-hmm. Like concepts come very late. How could you have a designer thinking in concepts before this happened? It's like something that has to evolve existing before it evolved. It's like something existing before the necessary preconditions for its existence.
Okay.
It'd be like a fish evolving before there was any water. Or things like that. Okay. We'll come back to that. That's a big thing we're going to come back to. It's a little taste of it. But something, if it's not God and the designer, something has to be making this happen. And it's happening very parsimoniously. That means not a lot of waste. Like, for instance, I said it starts with there's time, and then there's space, and then out of time and space you get natural laws. Well, why? What made that happen? What's causing that? So, if this is the cause of the universe, this process, what is causing the process?
Okay.
Okay, so this is jumping way forward. I've laid out the process now, and all the stuff that's concurrently happening. The lenses are building, and an evolution of forms is occurring, and a kind of a reincarnation is happening, where the legacy of the impressions of the individual are retained from life to life, without some soul going in and out of bodies and stuff. It all happens just by these lenses, nothing else. Okay. Now, this is a big topic, and I can't do it in one day. But I want to repeat the question again in my writing, because I wrote it, I worked hard on it. Okay, now the question arises, why does this process happen? Or what makes it happen? If this process of increasing lenses is what causes our world to unfold, and us in it, even us, caused us, then what causes this process? I've laid out the process, but what's causing the process? Why is it happening? What would make this happen? Now, I want to say something that I didn't know till I was working on my new book. And that is that evolution actually, it comes from a root, I think the Latin, and it means unfolding or unrolling, as in unrolling a scroll.
Okay.
Or unrolling a book that were rolled up, or unrolling a rug,
Yes.
to show the pattern, you know?
Yes.
Which implies it's all there before it evolves. Do you see the point?
Okay.
You got to have the book's written, the unrolling of the book's just the unrolling of the book that's there.
Turning the pages of the book.
Right, that's right. So it's kind of saying that there's something that's already kind of latent. You just have to now unroll it. Unroll the latency. It starts to sound like God speaks. Baba talks like that.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now, also the concept of unrolling, Darwin doesn't mean unrolling like when he describes his. His is just, you know, order out of chaos, whatever. Just whatever makes a godless world, that's what directed him. Actually, I'll talk later about exactly where Darwin got his ideas. It's really interesting. If I could get to it, I'll talk a little about it today. It's fascinating. You would be very interested. I hope you know a little of these things. Okay, so hold on. So there used to be a concept. the time of the Greeks. And actually, it only recently disappeared, but it was in the Middle Ages too. Do you know what a teleological concern is?
No.
Okay. It means the purpose. Teleological implies that things have a purpose.
Okay.
Okay. So, without getting too bogged down, Aristotle dealt with the issue of cause in an interesting way. That's usually thought of as quaint, okay? But lately, and right where I stopped my book, I was starting to go, wait a minute, there's something not quaint here, there's something highly intuitive in what Aristotle said, okay? Aristotle said, to really, when you want to explain something or give its cause, okay?
Yes.
And he kind of means the same way, the cause of something, when you go, well, what caused that? You want an explanation of how it got that way or got there, okay?
Right.
He says, to answer that, there's like four lines that you have to consider, okay? Four. I could add a fifth, which I am going to add actually, eventually. But one of them is the material cause. What is it made of, okay? So if I come upon a statue, part of its cause is it's made out of marble. That's part of, well, we're going to fully explain the statue, the existence of the statue. We need to know, well, what is it? It's made of marble. And then there's the efficient cause, like how did it get like that? Okay, so that's the sculptor. Okay.
Yes.
And then there's the formal cause, which is what is it? And it's a statue. It's decorative. And then there's one more, and this is the one that they don't. This is the teleological cause, which he called the final cause, which is just a funny use of words. But he meant ultimately, finally, what is its purpose? Okay. Remember, I said that the reason he thought that our eyes had to deliver true beliefs is because that was their purpose.
Yeah.
He believed there was purpose to everything. This is no longer bought into. However, I do think that if you were going to truly explain, I'm not so sure that you know there isn't a purpose. Okay. Now, if we turn now to Meher Baba, to his teaching, and that's sort of a jump. Baba says, Baba puts all this together. I have his chart from his book, God Speaks, the theme and purpose of creation. The theme and purpose of creation. Now, people haven't noticed, because they don't know all that I've been explaining to you. They don't realize what a jarring title that is.
Okay.
Because we live in a world where we aren't even looking for a theme and purpose. Darwinism has no theme and it has no purpose. Existentialism was created, and we haven't talked about it because we don't need to, is entirely dealing with the subject of, well, what do we do after there's no theme or purpose?
Okay.
How do we find some theme or purpose to our lives? Okay, because there's no God. Existentialism sort of starts with something, there's no God, so now what do we do? So we write a bunch of, Camus writes, it's all absurd. And then Sartre writes, how we live in dread. It's just sort of kind of funny.
What an existence.
Yeah, they're just sort of like expressing their angst, or joy that there's no God, and there's no theme, and there's no purpose. Here's Baba coming, and in 1955 writing a book that nobody pays any attention to, and it's the theme and purpose. Now, Baba says that this thing that I showed is a pattern in evolution where there's always more consciousness, okay? Is the purpose of creation. That it is in order to create that consciousness, that full consciousness, that the world came into existence. I have to say much more about how and why that happened out of his teaching later.
Okay.
But I wanted to tie it in at this point. I've shown that this is a different evolution. This is an evolution that is trying to achieve something. It is unrolling something and it takes the most expedient way to get to its purpose. He's not saying, though, that there's a designer or a design.
Mm-hmm.
It's different. A purpose could be caused by logical necessity or something else.
Okay.
It's sort of like it has to happen this way because that's rational or something like that. But we're not. When I say that the universe has a purpose, it's trying to get somewhere, or it is the getting there. I'm not saying it has a designer. That goes entirely against everything I'm saying, because in everything I'm saying, you're building up to things like people that have things like designs.
Okay.
We don't. It just to have that at the beginning of the process is to just sort of like ignore the whole theme of what I'm talking about. Get what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's saying, oh, we don't need a process. We have a designer. Like this would not have happened this way with the designer. You could just create more little designers. Okay. Now I want to go over some of this. Now. Yeah, I say, so we see a sign of purpose in this evolution, looked at this way. Which is not to say a sign of an intention. That would be like the designer. Get it?
Okay.
So we turn to the only person that ever, that as far as I know, wrote about a purpose of the universe. Even Aristotle didn't have a purpose for the universe.
He didn't?
No. That's funny. Isn't that funny? He should have. That would have been great. It would go with all the rest of his thinking.
What about Plato?
Well, by the way, Aristotle would not have said that because Aristotle did not believe that the world was created. Because he felt that it was just like, didn't make any sense. How could you get something out of nothing? Plato, did he believe that there was a purpose? Kind of. Yeah, I mean, we had this great fall, and then, you know, our sort of, I think it's implied there. I mean,
Okay.
Christianity relies a lot on early Christianity on thinking of Plato. That there is every soul is sort of trying to get back to the reality that from which it fell,
Okay.
and that's kind of the Christianity with the garden, and then we cast into the world because of the sin,
Yeah.
which is like the fall, and then we have to try to get back to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there is a theme.
Okay.
To life, or theme is certainly he's open to that for sure.
Okay.
Now, I want to say something about this more and more consciousness over evolution. In one of Meher Baba's books that was discovered after he died, it's called Infinite Intelligence. He gives an analogy of this evolution of perception, of ability to perceive over all the different forms, as a kind of scoring a hole that's getting bigger and bigger, and it's sort of he gives, like, you can see more of the world that you're in, the bigger you make the hole, so you see the whole thing. And in a human, he says you see the whole thing. So I'm going to read a little writing of that. I think talks about this. Something in evolution perception is something that in evolution is always moving forward, ever increasing, never backward. There's no instance of an from here to here and it got dumber or more blind. In this sense of like scoring a hole.
Okay.
Never decreasing. It is an advancing degree of perception and ability to form abstractions, which is what concepts are, but also process these into concepts. conscious experience of the world in all its detail is increasing, never decreasing. And now, when you finally become a human being, your ability to perceive and abstract and consider your abstractions and have concepts becomes so refined that you begin to ask questions like, where did I come from? Where did the universe come from? What is it made of? The deepest, deepest questions. Meher Baba says that man is our form is the end of the evolutionary journey. In Darwin, you don't have an end because there's no aim for anything. But in Baba, you have achieved the purpose for that you evolved to do, which is you have the capacity now to realize your true identity, which is that original perception. But we're going to find out. It's going to get deeper. But for the moment, let's just still call it perception.
Okay.
Though you probably won't in your lifetime, Mr. McPherson, you right now have everything you need to realize the absolute truth, according to Meher Baba.
Yes.
And in that sense, you're perfect, okay? And you have the perfect body. You have the perfect nervous system. Your nervous system is sufficient. Even though you're blind, you have you might have some candida. We'll talk. We'll do another show on our health another time.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. Now, should I
Pause.
No, I think I want to keep talking because I at this point I want to say a little more. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to say a little more. I don't have any visual aids. I can put them in if I want later when I'm editing. But I want to say a little more because do you need to stretch, stand up, take a break?
I'm fine.
Good. Okay. So I'd like to talk a little longer because I just have the energy, and I can always cut it out and redo it. But this is a kind of completion point. Okay. Mm-hmm. I've explained more layers of this evolutionary process, and at least part of its purpose. Okay.
Okay.
In that Aristotelian sense, what is ultimately its function? Like, why is it created? To do what? What does it do? What's its purpose? Now, people always sort of thought they had a purpose. Okay.
Yeah.
And their purpose was to go to heaven. You know, to be good, be a Christian, or if you're a Muslim, it was to, do your prayers,
Yeah.
be a good Muslim, so you go to heaven.
Or get more material stuff.
Well, that's more modern. Let's just say I'm thinking of Middle Ages. I'm thinking before the French Revolution.
Okay.
Now, in the Enlightenment, because of a lot of thinking about mind and body and all this stuff, and also the discoveries during the first Industrial Revolution, which was in the 1700s, same time as the Enlightenment,
Yeah.
there was a lesson and a discovery of the natural laws by Newton, some of them. People started to see that, they had this idea of the divine, they started to feel like they didn't need God, okay?
Oh, really?
Yeah, because things kind of, if you have laws that govern things, maybe God's not doing it, maybe these laws are.
Science.
Yeah, science started in place. Right, I mean, there's this sort of optimism that science would eventually replace these things. And that became a big trend, and get rid of the church. And in the French Revolution happened at the turn of the beginning of the 19th century, and then 50 years later, 1859, Darwin wrote his greatly anticipated book. He didn't write a book that shocked the world. He wrote a book that was pre-sold by the time it hit the publisher.
Oh, okay.
It's like everybody was waiting to get their copy because they'd heard about it. Because it took 20 years to write it. And they really wanted it because it promised to give some kind of answer that was not spiritual. Okay.
Okay.
And so he proposed that there was no need for any spiritual because he proposed a kind of mechanical thing that operated by chance. Okay, so chance mutations, and then the better mutations are chosen by which mutations lead to the having of more, leaving of more progeny. So, you know, if you can survive a little longer than your neighbor, you'll eventually replace your neighbor, was the thinking.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, I want to say something about where he got this idea. Okay, he was there was an economic theory and the hidden hand of the economy. You know, the capitalist hidden hand. Have you ever heard of it? It's an economic hidden hand. It's not an evil hidden hand.
Oh,
it's the hidden hand that makes supply and demand work out. You don't have to have a state setting prices, okay?
Okay.
That these prices will work themselves out because of supply and demand. Supply and demand was sort of like this hidden hand that fixed itself, okay?
This came about in the 1800s.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, or the 1700s. I mean, it's really famous philosopher, and I should know, but I'm not a good social political philosopher, and I can't remember his name, but if I knew, you'd know, you'd go, oh, him. At least you'd heard of him. And so Darwin was influenced by this, that he thought, he took the idea of the factory and market economy and products and supply and demand, and he projected it onto the animal world. And this is well known and documented, okay?
Okay.
The other thing is that, so in other words, he didn't bind his system in nature, he was sort of putting on a lens, and he was sort of interpreting what's going on in nature in terms of our human supply and demand system of capitalism, where if I come along and I make a better widget and I sell it for less than you, you're going to go out of business, and I'm going to replace you. You get it?
Yeah.
And so you sort of would have an evolution, you know, sort of like now you've got my factories all along the lane, okay? Because I made a better widget. You got it? Supply and demand.
Right.
So that's what he's doing. That's how he figured it.
Yeah.
However, you don't really see that in nature. You don't see a thing, see, at the time that Darwin was thinking, there was very, very scarce fossil record.
Okay.
That's why he was in those islands collecting, you know, finches, because he was kind of trying to make his own, try and line it up and make things work. But the fossil record, that kind of record of seeking fossils of dinosaurs and stuff was brand new, and there was very little. Okay. Now we have a very, very voluminous fossil record, and there are things that shouldn't be there, patterns that are not predicted by Darwin. They go against his theory. For one of the things that we find is that when something appears on the scene, the thing that was existing before it doesn't just die because it now does it better. They coexist. If you look at nature, things aren't really in that kind of economy like a dog eat dog, like English economy in 1859, like the way it would have been there, cutthroat. Okay, put you out of business like Walmart does. Comes into a town and all the clothing stores go bankrupt, right? Yeah. It's a laissez-faire, ruthless capitalism. That's what he thought was going on in the animal world. But actually, you know, there was this thing in 15 years ago or so where they released these wolves in Yellowstone Park. Did you hear about that?
No.
Okay, well, they decided to release some wolves in Yellowstone. And the wolves had been removed long ago because, you know, they killed the deer and stuff. But Yellowstone's big enough that they could control it. So they released some, I forget how many wolves, as an experiment. Anybody can look this up. And anywho, when they did that, because they put something back that needed to be in the system, everything flourished better. So,
Even the deer?
yes, the deer, finally the deer. So it had to do with like beavers and dams and then ducks, and then because of the ducks, things like this, and everything got better in line. It's sort of like kind of like New Age, you know, killing the worms and you're calling that or causing the cancer. You know, everything started working better. So a more modern view of nature is that it's not in this kind of competition that he imagined was there, where the whole thing is like kill or kill, kill or be killed. The other thing is that instead of, if that were true, if Darwin was right, then what we would now have in the natural world are things that, first of all, the only thing that would be sustained by a Darwinian evolution is something that has the most surviving offspring, because it's a numbers game. So therefore, creatures would just lay, you know, trillions of eggs, and they'd all live, and they would just kill everything else on the earth, and that's what would exist, you know. And it wouldn't matter what they looked like. They could have like 5, you know, dribbling eyes. Yeah. They could be blind. Who cares? They're just having babies. Like that's it's like one virus that just kills everything would then just like be the earth. It wouldn't be like it is now. And as a matter of fact, the softest, gentlest things often survive. Okay. One of the softest, gentlest things that ever survived was the two-legged hominid.
Okay.
The two-legged one. You know, we don't have any missing links walking around. Little monkeys on 2 legs do everything and have hands. They all died. And yet we are the progeny of them. They were so fragile. They found an ancient pit. This evolution only happened in the last 3 million years. It happened very quickly. They found a cave that was like, goes underground, near the remnants of an ancient, like, petrified tree. And the cave was full of the heads of these hominids, okay?
Oh.
And they had the teeth mark of a leopard. And this tree was outside the door of the thing. So apparently, a leopard just spent years just dragging these things up in the same tree, eating them, and dropping the heads to roll down into this cave, because they all had the leopard teeth in it. Gotcha. In other words, this was a pitiful little thing. It couldn't run, it couldn't run as fast as anything. You see, 2 legs, you can't run as fast as a leopard. No. You couldn't climb as well. You couldn't do anything. You didn't have any, you weren't smart. See, they used to think that people got smart and then they stood up, but actually they found that they first stood up and then they got smart. So we're talking about basically just chimpanzees that can't move very quickly. Gotcha. Okay, that's the missing link. That's a very fragile thing. It took over the world, and we are them. Okay. The other thing that is a doctrine of Darwinian evolution is that evolution is happening all around, all the time, at every level of the food chain, say. Therefore, you should be getting new species of, say, birds now, as you did when birds first appeared on the earth. Because there's no pattern, see? You should be getting, but you don't. The fossil record shows that there's sort of like these periods. And in these periods, a kingdom of things evolves, but nothing earlier than it. So let me give you an example. Let's say there's a time that all the plants evolved, okay? And then there's a time when the insects did. And then there's a time, let's take the insects, okay? So that was tens and tens of millions of years ago. 100 million years ago, okay? You get the dragonfly. Okay. Well, the dragonfly 100 million years ago looks just like it does today. No change. You see? There's
Yes.
no evolution. There was an evolution when it was the time of the evolution of insects. All the insects appeared. Now, you should have in-betweens of everything. Remember anyway, that was what was imagined in 1859. One day we'll find all the in-betweens.
Oh.
But actually, there are rooms full of, in museums, rooms full of rhinoceros bones that are, 10 million years old. Okay?
Okay.
Roomfuls. They're all rhinoceroses.
Nothing.
Nothing interesting. What you have is you do have extinctions going on all the time, and it gives the impression that things are different than they used to be. But it's just a lot of the things that evolved during the evolutionary period of a kingdom of animals dies off. So we no longer have, saber-toothed tigers.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't. So, and from that you sort of get the idea that, what was a saber-toothed tiger became a modern tiger, but it's really not quite like that. It was both tigers and one of them died out.
Okay.
Now the thing is, too, is there are patterns, and somebody would just laugh and laugh. I don't know why they'd laugh. If you can't see a pattern, and then you're blind, as you said. You have no capacity to process any thoughts of any kind. You wouldn't even know that you had money in your pocket, or who you were. So, if you patterns, that there are cases where there's no pattern, and there are cases where there's a pattern. But when there's a pattern, you have to be able to explain the pattern. Now, here's a pattern. Now, let's just take mutations, because Darwinism is based on mutations.
Okay.
One of the most common mutations, if you ever had we did it when I was a kid, we had like a 7-toed cat. You had a couple extra toes. That's really common. There's a name for it, okay? There's another name when something lacks a toe, so it's got like 4 toes, okay? That's like one of the most common mutations. There is both of those. Okay, so you got an extra thumb, okay?
Yeah.
However, the 5 digits on a paw or goes back hundreds of millions of years. If you look in a porpoise, they have 5 fingers in its fin.
Okay.
5. It's never 4.
All that
It's
way
never
down.
6. But the most common mutation is the 6. Why is it being preserved? Now, the same with a lot of things. 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears. But just back to the fingers a second. There's something called a 3-toed sloth. Okay?
Okay.
So that would make you think that there's something that defies what I just said. That it doesn't have 5 toes. It has 3. The thing is that a 3-toed sloth has 2 thumbs.
Okay.
It's funny, you see? So, while you have constant change there, it's never being retained, okay? So that's a problem. Now, the other thing is that take a human being, stretch him out, and he's got, it's like 5 points, like a,
Yeah.
so does a starfish, it has 5. Now the starfish is hundreds of millions of years earlier, and it never changed in those hundreds of millions of years. But that general shape of the, the 5
Yeah.
points of the star are still in our body.
Yeah. That was Michelangelo, wasn't it?
Now I'm going to talk about Michelangelo. So people see that have seen the picture by Michelangelo. It's called like the antediluvian man or something. No, antediluvian means pre-flood. I forget what he's called. We'll find him just so the audience. Man, Leonardo da Vinci. It's called the Vitruvian man. Okay, I don't need to do that. Man is enough. Okay, let's put up the picture. Okay, you're picturing it right now, so
Okay.
but I'm going to show it to the camera.
Okay.
This is called the Vitruvian Man. It's done by Michelangelo. Now people see it, it's one of the most recognizable, iconic images of man. It's sort of the symbol of humanism, man.
Yeah.
You know, man is the center of the universe.
Yeah.
But there's a lot in this that people don't know. And the reason I know is because my father went to the Rhode Island School of Design.
Did he?
Yeah.
Oh.
In Rhode Island. And my father said, did you know, Chris, that, and this is shown in the picture. I mean, there's a square and there's a circle around the Vitruvian Man, okay? Now I'm gonna stand up and do this.
Oh,
If I stand up and I put my 2 feet down and I hold my 2 arms straight out,
Oh.
I'm like a tree, okay?
yes.
Okay, so you get it, I'm like a cross, all right?
Yeah.
And I'm stiff. If you took a tape measure and you measured from the end of my middle fingers, one to the other, you'd get 5'11" and a half.
Okay.
5 foot 11 and 1/2 inch. And if you measured from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, it'd be 5 foot 11 and a half. It's the same.
Same.
Therefore, you can draw a square around that. Where does the center of the square fall? Right here at my groin.
Okay.
Okay, the line under my fatty fat, that line. Okay. Now, if I take my legs and they move them out from like my trunk, and I hold my arms vertically, now I'm like a cross, but they're vertically out. Okay, so I'm holding myself like a starfish.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you took a compass and you put the point of the compass on my belly button, you could now, and then you ran it around in a circle, it would hit the ends of my fingertips out here,
Yeah.
and hit those, and it would hit the bottoms of my feet, and it would form a perfect circle. Perfect circle. Okay? So, my body is like a compass for a square, perfect square, same height as width, for equilateral quadrangle, and you hit a circle. Now there's a thing. There's no other thing in nature that you can do that with.
Okay, we're unique then.
No, yeah. If you took an orangutan, it has very long arms and very short legs.
Yeah.
So you would have this big, wide oval trying to do that, okay? And a long rectangle, all right? And if you took a dog, then it would be sort of up and down. It has a long trunk and little legs and stuff. And it would be a rectangle and an oval. The only creature that has this perfect circle and perfect square is a human. That is a pattern. To deny that that pattern exists is madness. That's just, you're just lying. You're like one of those people who claims to not be conscious because it works.
Yeah.
But no, it's there, and you have to have a reason that it's there. Now, in sacred geometry, which goes back to Plato, the circle represents the divine, and the square represents the physical.
Okay.
Okay. So sort of like heaven and earth. Okay.
Right.
The reason that the circle represents the divine is because of the number 1. It goes forever. It's like has only one side. Okay. It has one center. It has one side. It goes forever. It's eternal.
So
It's
what
oneness.
you,
And that's a symbol. I mean, one has always been represented as the sacred or the most real. Even in our systems, remember that we began with singularity. There was this perception, but there was no number because you only got number from certain schemas. Okay, so it's absolutely one, all right?
okay.
And from that oneness in my system, you get all kinds of duality, and up and down and left and right. Well, the square represents that. It represents duality, okay? It's got 4 equal sides, and that's the symbol of the corpuscular world, or the temporal world. So the sacred. So you have the symbolism of God and man in one. The man if we were going to read the symbolism in our body of the square and the circle, is that man is the bridge between the sacred, between the carnal and the divine, or the sacred. Okay, he is the bridge. So I just said you have the capacity to realize your own divine original nature and remain conscious, which is called, you know, moksha or mukti in the East, or in Christian mysticism, it's called mystical union. Okay. Now,
What did Buddha call it?
nirvana, but right. So now that is an argument for saying Meher Baba. There's evidence, great evidence, that Meher Baba is right. There are signs that there is a terminus to evolution. Evolution is not random. The purpose of creation is to achieve full perception, full capacity of the mind, so that so you can achieve real, true spiritual identity of yourself as the original creator of the world in which you find yourself. Okay, and that's what Meher Baba teaches. It's never been that clear in any other preceding teaching, including Advaita Vedanta. They don't even, there are Advaita Vedantists that don't just, it's narrow. Their main thing is that there's just singularity.
Okay.
That's enough. So, I also wanted to, no, there's one more thing, it's important. Now, when Darwin looks for a cause for, now his book is called The Origin of the Species, okay?
Yes.
That means our species. How did people get here, okay? So my story tells not only how we got here, but it also tells why we got here. But Darwin doesn't have a why because he's abandoned teleological questions of purpose. It's just accidents. It's random, okay? So if the universe, we were created and the whole world around us is the result of just chaotic accidents, and and there's no purpose to our existence, is it any wonder that the world's going crazy? You see?
Well, it's a sad world.
Right. The people do not know what their purpose is, and therefore they seek, like you said, you know, money. Maybe they'll make that their purpose, or just getting a drug to get through the end of the day and get their drug before the day ends, so they can, you know, knock themselves out. People don't, and people are changing their gender because they don't know what's wrong. How come I feel so uncomfortable? That's really a sign of a person who doesn't know what they're doing here. They're not trying to find some divine higher realization. They're just thinking, well, maybe if I change my gender, I'll feel more comfortable. Maybe I'm in the wrong body. But in this system, things like that are absurd. There's nothing in your body but blood and guts. This is just all absurd. Now, so Meher Baba, writing a book in 1955 that called The Theme and Purpose of Creation, and then giving a purpose for it, okay, which is more than I've elaborated on here. I said it's that the universe is a consciousness factory. He says that, and he says that the evolution that we find in nature, he basically equates this is nature, evolution. This is the whole world is evolution, okay, meaning it evolved, and these are the relics of that evolution, you know, all these creatures.
Yes. And
the wood that this building is made of is from trees that we cut down that are outside in nature, which are part of evolution. And that evolution or universe is the byproduct of the consciousness factory. That's really what's going on, okay? So what's really happening is that consciousness is being created by this set of lenses, okay, which he calls, and the byproduct is the world.
Okay.
It's very funny, but it's so it's the opposite of anything anybody ever thought before. Usually we think of consciousness as like a byproduct of a physical evolution, but he's saying that the physical evolution is byproduct of an evolution of consciousness, which I've just shown there's evidence for. There is a pattern that each species is, as they evolved over time, has more consciousness.
Yes.
And more ability to see and understand and think about more of the world. And so we can even think about, you know, places out in the universe that we could never even reach, but we can have a good, you know, model of them intellectually. So I believe that this is not what we're talking about is not a academic exercise in, you know, mental masturbation. You know, we are not just doing something because, you know, we're intellectuals and we like thinking about things. No, it's utterly important. It's the most important. A world without purpose is going to destroy itself, obviously. Everybody says that. Really everybody says that. I mean, Einstein said that. Stephen Hawking said that. Everybody says that.
Okay.
So, if in order for there to be a purpose to the universe, there has to be a complete rewrite of how the universe got here. It's not like we're tweaking. We're throwing out and completely replacing the metaphysics of the past with one that is morally, that could create a world you'd want to live in, okay? The reason being that there's a purpose to life. There's more, we'll talk about more reasons why it would be a world we want to live in. There are reasons that in this world that you realize that we're all one, that we're not really separate, that all these things like race and things like that are all just superficial and apparent, that the reality is we're not just like the same, but we are the one. You and I are one person talking to itself through a different set of lenses. And it appears like you're there, I'm here. But really, I'm talking to myself, and you're talking to yourself. That the one is speaking through my mouth and hearing through, and those ears are the ears of the one, and vice versa. Now, one last thing is that I've explained in this process that I've been going over for now, this is the 6th segment of this series. I explained how and why the laws of nature formed and what they are. They're ways of organizing the experience of anything, okay? They are perceptual schemas, okay? Darwinism and materialism have no explanation for the laws of nature. So they describe all kinds of things occurring in terms of the laws of nature, but no account for the laws of nature. Not what they are or where they come from.
That's a flaw.
That's a flaw. That's just, I mean, what were they going to do? I mean, they didn't have the theory, so they have nothing. They have no answer to that. So when they talk about a big bang, and it banged and it went out, something went out of something, they're describing an event in terms of a bunch of laws that they can't explain. So therefore they're not explaining anything at all. They're also describing something that happens in an imagined space, but what is space? Where did it come from? They have no answer to that. There is nothing to it. It has nothing. It's not an explanation. Because if you can't even explain the terms of your own explanation, the dynamics of your explanation, it's not an explanation. It's thin, it's mysterious, it's magical, and it's vacuous. And it doesn't satisfy anybody. Nobody's nobody's satisfied by the, well, there are people that are that stupid. There are. They go, oh, the Big Bang. Okay. I want to talk a lot lot more, and there's a lot more to say, and even more about the anomalies. But that's great. I think we covered a lot of material.
We did?
You good? Do you think I did okay?
Did fine.
Okay, thank you very much, Kerry. We'll see you next time. I don't have anything to add. I really appreciate that you're here doing this with me, because I think these things, and who am I going to tell? What am I going to do with it? I can't talk about it, because you have to talk about the earlier things for these later things to make any sense.
Yeah,
A friend.
lay the path.
Yeah, you have to lay the path. It's a path you got to walk down, and it's long, and for a lot of people, it's boring. It's not their thing. But I think as we come out of this, where I'm no longer just sort of telling you the elementary, steps of the idea, we can talk more about just sort of like brainstorming the implications
Good.
of that, of such a change. Okay, well, we'll see you next time. Thank you for being with us.